Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. The man pictured here, James Buchanan, is often found at the bottom of the list of favorable rankings of presidents of the United States. His single term as the 15th chief executive of the Republic was marred by an inability to staunch the rising tide of political division, arguably beyond any single leader's ability and capacity to control at this time in the nation's history. Buchanan presided during the Dred Scott decision in 1857, bleeding Kansas and the Lecompton Constitution from 1857 to 1858, the financial panic of 1857, a standoff between the federal government and Mormon settlers in Utah, also between 1857 and 1858, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859, and the secession of Southern states. It was an eventful 4 years, a troubling 4 years in the country. Buchanan remained remarkably silent during his final weeks in office as the seceded states moved to seize United States arsenals and other federal property. Buchanan is often dismissed as a tired old man eager to leave Washington and return to the comfort and relatively carefree life at Wheatland, his estate in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. In fact, Buchanan, who advocated for a smaller federal government and supported states' rights, especially on the question of slavery, found himself in the unenviable position of presiding over the country torn apart by these issues, and he seemed powerless to control events moving so quickly, with new developments happening every day and spread by mass media then in its infancy. Buchanan had lost any ability to influence the narrative, with seemingly no chance to control or dominate it. In essence, the positions he supported were aligned with the Southern states who had now left the very union he had led as president and commander in chief. It can be fairly stated that Buchanan occupied a most awkward position that only grew more awkward as his tenure in the White House came to an uncomfortable end. The awkwardness is captured in an anecdote by Edward Davis Townsend, life dates 1817 to 1893, who served as an assistant adjutant general to Winfield Scott, the general of the U.S. Army. Townsend, a Massachusetts born, West Point class of 1837 graduate, had a history with the Adjutant General's Department going back some 15 years before the Civil War. Judging from various accounts, he was the consummate staff officer who played an important part in keeping the Army organized, well supplied, and moving, and various outposts spread across the expanding country. Townsend had an encounter with Buchanan, President Buchanan, in the fall of 1860 as the Southern states stood on the precipice of secession, and the subject was a topic of conversation across the disunited country. Townsend shared a story in his 1884 book, Anecdotes of the Civil War in the United States. I want to share it with you because I think it captures the awkwardness that surrounded Buchanan and the uncomfortable position he occupied as the country was drifting towards civil war. Townsend begins with President Buchanan was very fond of visiting the soldiers' home near Washington. He sometimes, in the summer, occupied the quarters of one of the officers stationed there with whom he was on terms of friendly intimacy. I was asked by this officer to meet the president at dinner one day in the fall of 1860. The Bishop of Maryland was also there. It was a delightful day, and I walked out in order to enjoy the fresh air and exercise. There were some 12 or 14 persons at the dinner. The hostess sat at the head of the table with the president on her right and myself on her left. The bishop was on the left of the host at the other end of the table. In the general conversation that ensued, it happened that the probable action of the southern states in the pending troubles was discussed. The opinion was expressed that several of them would secede. Already, several officers of the Army and Navy from those states had resigned. Mr. Buchanan seemed to be much annoyed and said little. Presently, some allusion was made to Massachusetts when the president said, with considerable warmth, "I wish Massachusetts would secede. She is practically already out of the Union by her action in the fugitive slave matter." Now, this is Townsend writing, being a Massachusetts man, felt rather awkwardly at this. Questions as to what I ought to do coursed rapidly through my brain. Suddenly, an inspiration seized me. Looking up at the president, who was directly opposite me, I said with mock humility, "Mr. President, if Massachusetts should secede, would it be my duty to resign from the Army, sir?" There was a dead silence. The president looked a little confused and asked, "Are you from Massachusetts?" "Yes, sir," said I, "but I have been a good deal in California and became very fond of that state, which makes me sometimes feel like saying of it, as the Irish soldier did when asked where he came from, 'I was born in Ireland, sir, but I call Illinois me native state.'" This excited a good laugh, and the conversation afterward took a more general turn. I hardly knew whether or not to congratulate myself on my hit, but after dinner the president showed that he took it in good part, for he asked me how I came out of town. On my saying I had walked, he offered me a seat in his carriage if I would ride into town with him. Of course, the offer was accepted with pleasure. On the way, I piloted him to the Oak Hill Cemetery in Georgetown, where he desired to see a monument he had ordered in memory of a favorite niece who was interred there, and of whose gentle nature he spoke with feeling and affection. He asked my opinion of the monument and remarked that he had not yet prepared the inscription, which was the only part unfinished, and that he feared he would hardly be able to attend to it properly before the time came for him to leave Washington. I offered to assist him in any way and subsequently drew a plan of the monument with the words of the inscription arranged on it for his approval. I then attended to the cutting of the words and the setting up of the monument. This ride was thus the prelude to one of those episodes of life where the tender emotions of the heart shine forth with most sweetness amid the stern perplexities and harsh criticism which attend high public office. It caused me ever to remember with kind feelings the official parting with Mr. Buchanan when, a few weeks after, he retired from the presidential chair. So there you have a unique anecdote about President James Buchanan, told by Edward Townsend, Assistant Adjutant General to Winfield Scott. Again, I think that it captures the awkwardness that was happening about that time in political circles, particularly the circle around Buchanan, as the approaching war, the end of his term, and all of the machinations of secession and the soon to be formed Confederate States of America would challenge his authority and challenge, of course, the incoming president elect, who eventually had to deal with all of it. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.